The participation of transgender athletes and people with differences of sex development, or DSDs, in women's sport is controversial. Recent flashpoints include the BBC Women's Footballer of the Year award going to a player suspected of being a male with a DSD, the Ladies Professional Golf Association banning trans athletes, revelations about Olympic boxers with DSDs, and American volleyball teams forfeiting games rather than playing against a trans athlete. Although many have objected to allowing transgender women, who are males that identify as women, to compete in the women's category, prominent media personalities such as Neil deGrasse Tyson and Sabine Hossenfelder have defended this possibility. Neither of these people are responsible for sports policy, but both are trained physicists and claim that paying close attention to the relevant science reveals how it's fair for trans women to compete against females under some circumstances. I think their arguments are mistaken, and their mistake hinges on a failure to grasp that there are different kinds of sporting contest which understand fairness in sport in different ways. I also think important sports organizations, such as the International Olympic Committee and World Athletics, make the same mistake. So the different ideas about fairness in sport are worth careful consideration. I'm afraid the science is not going to say what counts as fair in sport, and careful empirical observation alone will not settle the matter. Rather, we need to do some philosophy of sport to see the different ways a sporting contest may be fair. What follows is an hour-long video essay in which I outline these different forms of fairness, and in light of this discuss the positions of Neil deGrasse Tyson, Sabine Hossenfelder, the International Olympic Committee, and World Athletics on transgender women in women's sport. I close with a discussion of World Athletics policy on athletes with differences of sex development in women's sport. Consider the racket game squash. In squash, there's something called the Universal Squash Rating. This is a rating that any player can get that indicates how good they are at squash. The rating system depends on players playing many matches against a variety of opponents and entering their results into a database, as well as the results of their opponents playing other people. A complicated algorithm is used to predict the outcome of as yet unplayed matches from these results. Players with a rating of 1.5 are beginners, while players with a rating of 7 or more are elite. The same rating system is applied to all players, no matter their age or sex. So, if a 55-year-old woman and a 20-year-old man have the same rating, this means that if they played each other, they should be evenly matched. If one player has a rating of 0.4 points greater than another, then the match is expected to be won by the higher rated player without losing a game. The reason people use the rating system is to find other players of similar ability so that they can have a competitive match. If one player is outmatched by the other, so that the result is a foregone conclusion, we might think of it as unfair. This, then, is one sense in which a sporting contest might be fair. A fair contest is one in which each competitor has a sporting chance of winning. Rating systems are used to produce fair contests in other sports as well. Golf uses a handicap system in which each player is given a rating according to the number of strokes they are expected to take to get round a golf course. If they usually get round a golf course using the number of strokes considered par for the course, then their handicap is 0. If they usually need 10 more strokes than this, then their handicap is 10. Players with the same handicap can expect an evenly matched contest. Players with different handicaps can produce a close contest by subtracting their handicap from their score at the end of the round of golf. In other words, a better player with a handicap of 0 would need to beat a weaker player with a handicap of 10 by more than 10 strokes in order to win the match. The weaker player is given a sort of head start so that each player has a sporting chance of winning. Horse racing does something similar. In handicap races, the faster horses are made to carry more weight in their saddle, which slows them down, giving slower horses a sporting chance of winning. So, in these forms of squash, golf, and horse racing, A fair contest is one in which each competitor has an equal chance, or at least a sporting chance, of winning. I will call such contests where rating systems are used to enhance or to restrict or to prevent the performance of some competitors so that all competitors can have a sporting chance of winning, handicap contests. This, however, is not the only form of sporting contest. At the Los Angeles Olympics in 2028, squash will be included as a sport for the first time. But players are not included in the matches because they'll have a similar universal squash rating. I'm a poor squash player, but I will not be invited to the Olympics, even though there are many other poor squash players that I could play that would give me a sporting chance of winning. Similarly, the major championships in golf don't add or subtract some strokes from competitors' scores to produce a closer competition. At the equestrian events in the Olympics, the best horses are not given weights to carry to make it harder for them to run so quickly and jump so high. The point of Olympic and championship sport is to allow players, athletes, and teams to compete freely so that the best players, athletes, and teams can win. The Olympics and other championship contests are designed to find the best players and athletes, not to provide a close contest between competitors. Indeed, some Olympic events are not close contests. Usain Bolt in sprinting, Katie Ledecky in swimming, and Armand Duplantis in the pole vaulting regularly put in performances which other competitors cannot hope to match. There are athletes who are in a league of their own. Even so, restricting their performance in some way, or enhancing the performance of others, or preventing them from competing altogether, would be seen as profoundly unfair. The Olympics and other championship contests are not handicap contests. Their purpose is to find the best athletes, the best players, and the best teams, to find champions. A fair contest, in this sense, is one in which the rules apply to all competitors equally, and in which no competitor suffers an imposed restriction that other competitors do not. If one competitor is given a head start whilst others are not, then this is unfair. If one competitor is made to carry a weight whilst competing, whilst others do not, then this is unfair. If one competitor is made to play uphill or with the sun in their eyes, whilst others are not, then this is unfair. In a championship contest, it is unfair to enhance or to restrict or to deny the performance of any athlete to produce a closer contest. Championship sport and handicap sport have completely different ways of understanding fairness. But this leaves us with a question. If the purpose of championship sport is to find the best athletes, why, in championship contests such as the Olympics, are there men's and women's categories? Isn't categorization into sex and weight classes a way to ensure closer competition? Aren't sex and weight categories that prevent males and heavier people from competing a form of handicapping? It's important to see that they're not. Classification need not be a form of handicapping, used to eliminate better athletes and produce a closer competition. For example, greyhounds are not allowed to run in the 100-meter sprint at the Olympics, as categorization by species is used to prevent this. But we don't prevent greyhounds running in the Olympics because they are much faster than humans. A race between a greyhound and a human would be a foregone conclusion. No, we prevent greyhounds from racing humans at the Olympics because at the Olympics we are trying to find out who is the fastest human. As this is our goal, there's no point in including greyhounds in the race. We see humans as a distinct kind of athlete and wish to know what we are capable of doing athletically. So, we design a contest to find out. Even if you restricted the performance of the greyhound, perhaps by making it pull a sled or making it run twice as far, this would produce a close competition, but it would still not be fair. To promise human athletes a contest to decide who is the fastest human sprinter and then to allow greyhounds to compete and perhaps win would be dishonest and unfair. The same goes for women's sport. It won't have escaped people's attention that humans don't all have the same organs. Roughly half of humanity has testicles but not ovaries, whilst the other half has ovaries but not testicles. This difference in anatomy allows humans to reproduce sexually. We need the concepts of male and female in order to explain how humans and other sexually reproducing species reproduce. Even people who do not want to reproduce themselves should be interested in human reproduction, as if we do not make new humans, our societies have no future. Retaining concepts of the adult human male, the man, and the adult human female, the woman, is not bigoted, as it just reflects an interest in making new humans and the future of humanity. For the sake of clarity, I'll refer to those humans with testicles but not ovaries as gonadal males, and to those humans with ovaries but not testicles as gonadal females. Testicles produce testosterone, which influences the development of the human body, such that the best athletes at nearly any sporting event are male. Depending on the sport, the best gonadal males tend to be between 10 and 30% better at the sport than the best gonadal females. The best gonadal males finish running races in about 10% less time than the best gonadal females. The best gonadal males lift about 30% more than the best gonadal females. This need not be the case. There's no substantial difference in race times between male greyhounds and female greyhounds, for example, but in humans, there is. Now, we could just accept that and only hold races for humans, regardless of their sex. This would be to treat elite women athletes as reasonably good but not elite human athletes. However, many of us are interested in what the sort of human body that does not have testicles can do athletically. We want to know what gonadal females are capable of. The women's category in the sprint is used to answer the question, how fast can a human gonadal female sprint 100 meters? The women's category in championship sport does not exist to protect gonadal females from the athletic abilities of gonadal males, any more than the human category exists to protect humans from the athletic abilities of greyhounds. The women's category exists to explore the athletic abilities of gonadal females. Consequently, there is no point in including gonadal males in the women's category, even if their performance is diminished or if they are less than elite gonadal males who would provide a close contest with elite gonadal females. The same goes for the use of weight categories in championship sport. The 49 kilo female weightlifters are not sub-elite athletes who are given gold medals so they don't feel left out. As amazing as it is to watch a 160 kilo gonadal male lift 250 kilos overhead, it is just as amazing to watch a 49 kilogram gonadal female lift 115 kilos overhead. The performance of this athlete tells us something we want to know about the limits of human athletic performance. It answers the question, how much can a small human gonadal female lift overhead? In championship sport, we use categories to pose questions we want answered about human athletic performance. We use categories to define what we see as kinds of athlete to help find the very best athlete of that kind. There is no gold medal for white belt judo players. Olympic medals are not given to sub-elite athletes, no matter how closely matched they are with their competitors. So, we have two different sorts of sporting contest, the championship and the handicap contest, and two different forms of fairness in sport. In championship contests, categories are used to define kinds of athlete, and fairness means making sure that all athletes compete under the same rules and restrictions so that no athlete is treated differently to any other athlete. In handicap contests, categories and rating systems are used to enhance, restrict, and even prevent the performance of athletes to different degrees, so that a close competition is produced. In handicap sport, a fair contest is a close contest. There are a couple more forms of handicap contest that should be mentioned. Although I'm not aware of anyone who's put this into practice, sometimes academics and other people argue that the purpose of categorization in sport is to eliminate the unearned physical advantages enjoyed by some athletes, so that the athlete who develops the most skill or who puts in the most effort in their training will win. This is related to the idea that we are not entitled to rewards that we did not work hard to earn. As people with testicles did nothing to earn these organs, or the physical advantages that they produce, some think that the purpose of the women's category is to eliminate these unearned advantages. This does not explain, however, why other unearned advantages, such as arm length and lung volume, are not used to form categories. Also, even if Usain Bolt did not have to train as hard as other athletes to be as fast as he was, he would still have been celebrated as the fastest man to ever live. People would not say that he did not deserve his Olympic medals, even if they thought he had not worked as hard as other athletes. I find the idea that categories are used in sport to eliminate unearned advantages implausible, as Olympic medals are not prizes for effort, but this is a popular view in some circles. In this form of handicap sport, the performance of athletes is enhanced, restricted, or prevented so that the athlete who makes the best use of their physical abilities through training will win. A final form of handicapping in sport is also important. Sometimes there are particular physical advantages or disadvantages that people feel it is unfair for an athlete to have. Sometimes the effects of having testicles are seen as such an advantage. This is sometimes described as male advantage. On this view, it would be fair for a gonadal male to compete with gonadal females so long as the changes are made to their body that eliminate the advantages they gained by having testicles. Some suggest that this can be achieved by suppressing an athlete's serum testosterone levels. As it is impossible to know how a particular gonadal male's body would have developed if they had not had testicles at any point in their life, whether the athlete's performance has been sufficiently restricted is sometimes determined by their percentage loss in performance following testosterone suppression. If the loss of performance equals the average difference in performance between males and females in the relevant event, then the restriction in performance is deemed adequate. So runners would need to experience a 10% loss in performance, and weightlifters would need to experience a 30% loss in performance. Alternatively, the rank of the athlete's performance should be the same in the women's category following testosterone suppression as it was in the men's category before testosterone suppression. So if an athlete was the 500th best athlete in the world in the men's category before testosterone suppression, they should be the 500th best athlete in the world in the women's category following testosterone suppression. Please note, reducing an athlete's performance by some percentage does not necessarily produce a close contest. If the athlete was a poor male athlete who did not have a sporting chance of winning, then their performance should be reduced to that of a poor female athlete, who also does not have a sporting chance of winning. To be fair here is not to ensure a close contest, nor to ensure that the athlete who trains the hardest should win. Rather, to be fair here means to eliminate the effects of a particular physical advantage that their competitors do not have, or to provide the effects of a particular physical advantage that the competitors do have. All other physical and performance advantages are not controlled at all, meaning that competition need not be close, and the athlete who trains the hardest may still not win. This is certainly a different form of fairness to the other forms of fairness already discussed. Also note that this form of fairness produces a sort of handicap contest, as it is fair to restrict or enhance the performance of different athletes by different amounts. This would not be fair in a championship contest. Here, we want to find out how well an athlete would have performed if their body had developed differently to how it has actually developed, and we restrict or enhance the athlete's performance accordingly. In championship sport, by contrast, we want to find the best athletes, so no athlete's performance should be enhanced or restricted differently to any other athlete. In championship contests, we are not interested in the people who would have been the best athlete if their body had been different. Greyhounds are twice as fast as humans, but in championship contests designed to find out who are the best humans, we don't allow greyhounds to compete even if their speed is halved somehow. If the Olympics are a contest to find and reward the best athletes, there should be no handicapping of any kind. With these different forms of fairness in sport in mind, we can now turn to what various commentators say about how transgender women can fairly compete with gonadal males. Neil deGrasse Tyson has outlined his views on transgender women competing in women's sports several times over the last year or two. Remember, transgender women are gonadal males who have or had testicles. DeGrasse Tyson takes the purpose of categorization in sport to be to produce a close competition, or a competition between players with similar physical talents. He says, "What you want is a match that's interesting to observe. not where one person dominates the other. To illustrate his view, DeGrasse Tyson points to college American football, which is widely and enthusiastically viewed in the USA. He says that the popularity of college football is not because it's the best American football that's available to watch, as the worst team ever in the NFL could wipe its ass with the best team ever in college. He says that the popularity of college football is a result of the close competition between college teams. This must mean that college teams are all about the same level of ability, producing a close competition with an uncertain outcome. And it's this that makes the sport interesting. He says, "We like the equality of the contest and not knowing who would win. That's what makes sports fun." He also frequently discusses wrestling, which divides competitors into 10 weight categories, he says, in order to prevent the larger athletes dominating matches, to produce a close competition between competitors. The purpose of all categorization in sport, including sex categorization, according to DeGrasse Tyson, is to form groups of competitors that are evenly matched. If the purpose of categorization is to produce a close contest, then there's no particular reason why sex categories are especially important. So long as competitors have similar abilities, then an interesting contest can take place even between gonadal males and gonadal females. Elite female sprinters run 100 meters in between 10.5 and 11 seconds. Although the elite male sprinters are always faster than this, there are lots of gonadal males who are not, no matter how hard they train. If the object of categorization is to produce a close contest, why shouldn't these gonadal males compete in the women's category if they want to? The increasing visibility of trans women in society makes this a live question. Why shouldn't we find ways of categorizing athletes that doesn't use sex categories, but still provides close competition? DeGrasse Tyson says, "What the trans conversation is foisting upon us is the need to find ways to slice the athletic universe such that we still have interesting, fair matches." Note that here, DeGrasse Tyson states that close competition makes matches both interesting and fair. So DeGrasse Tyson thinks that fair sport is a form of handicap sport, in which the performance or the potential performance of athletes are matched. He sees all classification in sport as trying to produce close contests or contests between athletes with similar physical capabilities. It is true that this is how leagues function in sport. If someone is not good enough to play in a high league, they can find a lower league in which they are competitive and play there. But this isn't why other classifications are used in sport. We don't have college sport because all college teams are closely matched. I suspect some college teams are not closely matched at all. We have college teams because we want to know who the best college athletes and teams are. People don't watch college sport in the USA because the contests are close. They watch college sport because they are proud of their local college teams. They feel a rivalry with other colleges, perhaps dating back to their own college days, and they want their team to win. In particular, we do not have sex and weight categories in sport to produce close contests. If all we wanted was a close contest, we would just use a rating system like they do in squash. As discussed, we use sex and weight categories in sport because we want to know, for example, who the best small female weightlifters are and what they're capable of doing. We use categories like sex and weight to pose questions about human athletic performance that are answered in competition. DeGrasse Tyson suggests that instead of using sex, we could perhaps use hormone ratios to slice the athletic universe and produce close competition. Accepting that this would not work, he left how to slice the athletic universe as an open question worthy of further investigation. He says, "It's an unsolved problem, yes, but it's not unsolvable given what we know about human physiology. So why not rise to that occasion and solve it, rather than take your older view of the world and force modern emergent conduct of people to fit that?" DeGrasse Tyson thinks that this older view of classifying using biological sex is a relic of historical prejudices, which we will eventually look back on to be as pernicious as segregating society by race. He says, "The day you fix that playing field, this conversation will look completely ridiculous. That's what I'm trying to tell you." But the use of sex categories does not reflect a prejudice. It reflects our knowledge that humans have different bodies which contain different organs, and that these bodily differences influence athletic performance. It reflects our interest in what people with these different sorts of body can do with their bodies. This isn't ever going to be ridiculous unless society becomes profoundly sexist and stops caring about the athletic abilities of gonadal females. By contrast, racial segregation is wrong because skin color has no influence on whether someone is a human being worthy of dignity and who needs to use public transport, work, eat, and drink like anyone else. It's a pity that deGrasse Tyson doesn't appear to understand why racial segregation is oppressive. deGrasse Tyson is very keen to emphasize that, because our societies are free, people should be free to present themselves in any way they wish. If a gonadal female wants to present in a masculine way, or if a gonadal male wants to present in a feminine way, why shouldn't they? I completely agree. In free societies, people should be free to do this. I would add, however, that as our societies are free, people who want to organize sports contests to find out, for example, who is the fastest human who does not have and never had testicles, then they should be able to do that too. Only in an authoritarian society would people be prevented from doing this. If gonadal males want to compete with gonadal females in sports contests, then why not use a rating system to find well-matched opponents regardless of sex, as they do in squash? In some sports, such as boxing, it may not be safe to do this, but there are many sports in which gonadal males and females can compete together. People are free to organize a handicap contest if that's what they want to do, and they don't need to destroy championship contests to do so. Sabine Hossenfelder also thinks that fair sport is one in which all competitors have the opportunity to win if they train hard enough. She thinks that sex and weight categories are used to keep contests competitive and interesting. She says that we have historically segregated men and women in sporting events because otherwise competition becomes too predictable, too boring. In some disciplines, we have further categories for the same reason, like in weightlifting and boxing. She agrees with deGrasse Tyson that fair sport would group competitors by potential performance, but she thinks you would need to do a lot more than classify by hormone levels in order to achieve fairness. In order to achieve fairness, you'd have to try and measure every single parameter that contributes to athletic performance in a given discipline and then try to adjust for it. The result may be that the person who comes in last in a race is the winner, after you adjust for heart valve issues, testosterone levels, age, slightly misaligned legs, under average lung volume, and a number of other different conditions. And that would be fair in the sense that now everyone had a chance to win, provided they trained hard enough. But, Hossenfelder wonders, would people still watch it? Unlike deGrasse Tyson, Hossenfelder thinks that fair sport, in which competitors are grouped according to their physical potential, would not be entertaining to watch. She thinks that sex segregation is a gesture towards the goal of making sport fair, but recognizes that sex categories are not potential performance categories. There are no gonadal females with physical abilities of the elite gonadal males, but there are gonadal males with the physical abilities no greater than the elite gonadal females. Indeed, because there are so few elite females, there are many more sub-elite gonadal males than there are elite gonadal females. Hossenfelder points out that to include all the humans with physical abilities that are at the same level as the elite gonadal females, the sub-elite gonadal males would need to be included as well. This is not done, according to Hossenfelder, because people want to see gonadal females compete and win, and if a large number of gonadal males were included in the category, then this would not happen often enough to keep the contest interesting. So, to keep things interesting, the sub-elite gonadal males are excluded, even though this is unfair. As there are only a few trans women, however, Hossenfelder sees no harm in letting them compete in the women's category with the elite gonadal females, so long as these trans women have sub-elite physical abilities or are handicapped so that they have sub-elite physical abilities. So, to Hossenfelder, excluding sub-elite gonadal males from the women's category is unfair, and including sub-elite gonadal males who are trans women is not unfair. However, fairness in sport isn't especially important to Hossenfelder, who thinks that sport is deeply unfair anyway. She says, athletic competition has never been fair in the sense that some people are born with an advantage at certain types of sport, and being male is only one of them. Usain Bolt has long legs, Michael Phelps has big feet. There are also factors like bone density, cardiac output, or lung volume that are partly genetically determined. I have never had a chance to become an Olympic swimmer. Is that fair? No. Athletes are biological extremes. Fairness has never been the point of these competitions. They're really more like freak shows. So, Hossenfelder thinks that sport is fair when people with similar potential performance are grouped together, excluding people with different performance potential so that people who make the best use of their unearned physical abilities can win. But she also thinks that sport is not especially concerned with being fair. So, what's all the fuss about needing to have fair sport anyway? In a way, Hossenfelder is right. Many sports contests, such as the Olympics, are a freak show in the sense that the athletes are freakishly good at what they do. But fairness is still central to contests like the Olympics. It's just a different kind of fairness to what Hossenfelder has in mind. Hossenfelder thinks that the Olympics are a type of handicap contest, but they are not. They are a championship contest. A championship contest is fair when all the athletes compete under the same rules and restrictions. The performance of athletes is not restricted, enhanced, or prevented for any reason, and the athletes are not excluded or included in a category because of their potential performance. Categories are used to define kinds of athletes, and the contest is used to find the most freakishly good athletes. If a gonadal male and a gonadal female can each run 100 meters in 10.75 seconds, we may see the gonadal male as a fast man, but not a freak of nature. We do see the gonadal female who can run 100 meters in that time as a freak of nature, however, and that is why we have separate categories for gonadal males and females. A 49 kilo gonadal female and a 90 kilo gonadal female can each lift 115 kilos above their head. We may see the larger athlete as very strong, but the smaller one as a freak of nature. That is why we divide weightlifters into weight classes. If we did not have these class distinctions, we would not find all the athletic freaks. But we need to have fair sport to find them. Fair championship sport, not fair handicap sport. This is why gonadal males should not be allowed into the women's category, even if they are sub-elite or handicapped trans women. The purpose of the women's category is to find the gonadal females who are athletic freaks, and letting anyone who is not a gonadal female into the women's category obstructs this goal. Pretending to care about the athletic ability of people whose bodies have not been shaped by testicular tissue by organizing a contest for them, and then allowing people whose bodies have been shaped by testicular tissue to compete in this contest is dishonest and unfair. At all levels of sport, be it elite sport, junior sport, or just a fun run, people deserve to be able to find out how good they are as athletes. It's not just Neil deGrasse Tyson and Sabine Hossenfelder who think that fair sport is a handicap contest. The International Olympic Committee and World Athletics think so too. The IOC's most recent Framework on Fairness, Inclusion and Non-Discrimination on the Basis of Gender Identity and Sex Variations states in its section on fairness that no athlete within a category has an unfair and disproportionate competitive advantage, namely an advantage gained by altering one's body or one that disproportionately exceeds other advantages that exist at elite level competition. So, according to the IOC, a contest is fair so long as the physical abilities of an athlete can be matched by other physical abilities found in at least some other athletes. The IOC see Olympic sport as a handicap contest in which the physical advantages of athletes are matched to give many athletes a sporting chance of winning. This is strange, as Olympic sport is not any form of handicap contest. It's a championship contest. The purpose of Olympic sport is to find and reward the most exceptional athletes and teams. In Olympic sport, no athlete or team should have their performance restricted, enhanced, or prevented because of the suite of physical advantages that they have or because of their performance. It is saddening that the International Olympic Committee does not realize that they are organizing a championship contest and not a handicap contest. In recent years, both the International Olympic Committee and World Athletics have allowed transgender women to compete in the women's category if they suppress their blood testosterone levels for a period of time. Sports scientists have conducted reviews of the effects of testosterone suppression and concluded that testosterone suppression does not restrict the physical ability and performance of transgender women sufficiently for their participation in the women's category to be fair. In other words, those supporting the inclusion of transgender women in the women's category made the argument that if the physical ability and performance of gonadal males could be restricted sufficiently, then these gonadal males can compete fairly in the women's category. Testosterone suppression restricts the physical ability and performance of gonadal males sufficiently. Therefore, gonadal males can compete fairly in the women's category following testosterone suppression. Sports scientists, being empirically oriented people, focused on the second premise of this argument, arguing that testosterone suppression does not restrict the physical ability or performance of gonadal males sufficiently. But no attention has been paid to this first premise, which is the more important of the two, and which is not an empirical claim. It's a claim about fairness in sport. For one thing, what counts as a sufficient restriction depends on what is accepted as fair in sport. If a fair contest is understood as a handicap contest, in which the performance of competitors is matched so that each athlete has a sporting chance of winning, then an elite gonadal male needs to have their performance reduced to around the level of the elite gonadal females to be allowed to compete with them. A sub-elite gonadal male needs to have their performance reduced by a little less, also to the level of elite gonadal females. A sub-elite gonadal male does not need to have their performance reduced at all, as they are already on a par with the elite gonadal females. However, if a fair contest is understood as one in which the performance of a gonadal male needs to be reduced to the level that they would have had if their body had never been influenced by their testicles, then things are different. The elite gonadal male still needs to have their performance restricted to the level of the elite gonadal females, but the sub-elite gonadal male needs to have their performance restricted to below this, to the level of the sub-elite gonadal females, and the sub-elite gonadal males need to have their performance restricted to below this, to that of the sub-elite gonadal females. The amount of restriction required to be fair is determined by the way that fairness is understood, and this is not a matter that can be settled by empirical inquiry. We can see the effect of these different ways of understanding fairness in a conversation between Ross Tucker, a leading sports scientist, and Joanna Harper, whose work on the effect of testosterone suppression provided a reason for the IOC to allow handicapped gonadal males to compete in the women's category at the Olympics. Tucker claimed that all sports are now going to have to figure out how much of an advantage gonadal males have over gonadal females, so that they know the amount by which they need to reduce the performance of the gonadal males. Every single sport, by virtue of the IOC's guidance that was released last year, now has to answer the question, what is the difference in my sport between male and female? Because the whole premise of lowering testosterone was to negate the advantages as a consequence of androgens like testosterone. Harper, concerned about this approach, replied that mitigate and not negate would be a better term, because we know that there are advantages that are just not going to be negated. Harper recognized that testosterone suppression in gonadal males will not get rid of the 10 to 30% difference in performance, depending on the sport, between gonadal males and females. And yet, for Harper, getting rid of some of this advantage is enough to have fair competition, so long as the performance of the gonadal male is reduced to somewhere close to the gonadal females in the competition. Tucker disagreed, saying that it is not enough to mitigate the physical and performance advantages enjoyed by the gonadal males over the gonadal females. For fairness, the full difference in performance that exists on average between gonadal males and females would need to be eliminated from any gonadal male athlete wanting to compete in the women's category. For me, you need to negate. You can't mitigate. It must be negated, otherwise it's still a category crossing advantage. So I understand Joanna's point here, but for me, it's negate. Can we negate those advantages so that we can ensure inclusion, fairness, and safety can coexist. Now, that answer for a sport like, I'll use archery because there was a paper on it recently, may look completely different to that answer for boxing and rugby and track and field. So, for every single sport, that would probably be their key question. What's the typical advantage that we need to manage in order to ensure fairness, inclusion, and safety? It seems to me that these two sports scientists adopt different ways of understanding fairness. On the one hand, Harper thinks that a fair contest is one in which the performance of athletes in a category is roughly matched, so that all have a sporting chance of winning. On the other hand, Tucker thinks that a fair contest is one where the performance advantage resulting from having testicles is either not present or eliminated for all competitors in the women's category. Different ideas about how much the performance of gonadal males should be restricted before they can compete fairly in the female category are the result of different ideas about what fairness is in sport. What surprises me is that neither of these two sports scientists understand fairness as it is understood in championship contests. Their understanding of fairness is different, but they each think of fairness as found in a form of handicap sport, and disagree about how much an athlete would need to be handicapped for their inclusion in the women's category to be fair. But in championship sport, there is no handicapping. The purpose of the women's category in championship sport is to find the best gonadal female athletes. Why would handicapping a gonadal male and letting them compete in the women's category help to find out who is the best gonadal female? Even if the gonadal male's performance was restricted by 10 to 30%, why would this make things any better? The handicapping does not transform someone whose bodily development was influenced by testosterone produced by testicular tissue into someone whose body was not influenced by testosterone produced by testicular tissue. A slow greyhound is not a human, and a slow gonadal male is not a gonadal female. In championship sport, an athlete either has the kind of body that belongs in the category, or they do not. Handicapping is beside the point. Several sports governing bodies, including World Athletics, World Aquatics, and the Union Cycliste Internationale, have recently changed their policy on the inclusion of transgender athletes. They all recognize that testosterone suppression does not remove the full 10 to 30% performance advantage enjoyed by male athletes, and consequently do not allow gonadal males who have been through puberty to compete in the women's category, even if they suppress their testosterone. However, these actions tacitly accept that if the physical ability and performance of gonadal males could be restricted sufficiently, then these gonadal males can compete fairly in the women's category. This is going to inspire advocates for including transgender women in the women's category to suggest new ways of restricting performance of transgender women, who, remember, are gonadal males, and to suggest that a 10 to 30% reduction of performance is too much, as restricting performance to produce a close contest is sufficient. So long as the transgender women can be beaten, surely there isn't a problem. Well, if the contest is a handicap contest, it may not be a problem at all. However, if the contest is a championship contest, and as we are talking about the Olympics, it is a championship contest, then it should not be allowed. In my view, the first premise of this argument should be rejected for assuming the wrong account of fairness in sport. Although World Athletics does not allow transgender women to compete in the women's category even if they suppress their testosterone, they do allow people with some differences of sex development to compete in the women's category if they suppress their testosterone. This seems inconsistent, as if testosterone suppression is not thought to restrict athletic performance sufficiently in trans women, why would it do any better in athletes with differences of sex development? Differences of sex development are a collection of different conditions in which a person's sexual development does not proceed along the pathway that is typical for gonadal males or typical for gonadal females. All humans begin their development as a fetus with undifferentiated gonadal tissue, which could become either ovaries or testicles. The fetus will also have two sets of immature tubular structures, the Mullerian structures and the Wolffian structures. The Mullerian structures can develop into fallopian tubes, the uterus, the cervix, and some of the vagina. The Wolffian structures can form the epididymis, the spermatic duct, and the seminal vesicle. The external genitals form from the same embryonic tissue in the male and the female. The tissue that forms the labia majora in the female can form the scrotum in the male. The tissue that forms the walls of the vagina in the female fuses together in the male. The tissue that forms the clitoris enlarges to form the penis. In humans, typically, a gene on the sex-determining region of the Y chromosome, or SRY, triggers the male developmental pathway. In a person with two X chromosomes, the absence of SRY leads to the development of gonadal tissue into ovaries. The ovaries do not produce much testosterone, and the Wolffian ducts shrivel away. The fallopian tubes, uterus, and cervix develop, and the vaginal opening remains. In a person with XY chromosomes, the SRY gene leads to the development of the gonadal tissue into testicles. These produce large amounts of testosterone and another hormone called anti-Müllerian hormone. The anti-Müllerian hormone causes the Müllerian structures to shrivel away, and the fallopian tubes, uterus, and cervix do not develop. The testosterone supports the development of the Wolffian ducts into the epididymis, spermatic duct, and seminal vesicle. In the tissues that will become the external genitals, testosterone is converted into dihydrotestosterone, which causes the external genitalia to develop in a male typical way. The vaginal opening closes, the scrotum forms instead of the labia majora, and the penis forms instead of the clitoris. So typical sexual development can occur along two pathways, each of which has several stages, involving the development of gonads, the internal genital tubing, and the external genitalia. Deviation from one or other of these two pathways produces a difference in sex development. As there are many different points at which a difference can occur, there are many differences of sex development. It is often said that DSD regulations apply to women with naturally high levels of testosterone. This makes it sound as though gonadal females, who are people with ovaries and not testicles, are subject to DSD regulations, but this is not the case. It is also often said that people with a Y chromosome should be excluded from the women's category, but I don't think this is the case either. To see why, and to understand which parts of these developmental pathways are important for sport classification, it is useful to describe some differences in sex development. I describe 10 such conditions now. If the listener is familiar with these conditions, please skip to the next section. Differences in sex development are a collection of quite different conditions. For example, the SRY gene may contain a mutation that stops it functioning. A person with XY chromosomes and non-functioning SRY does not develop testicles. As there is no testicular tissue to produce anti-Müllerian hormone, the fallopian tubes, uterus, and cervix develop in the typically female way. As there is no testosterone, the Wolffian ducts shrivel away, and the epididymis, spermatic duct, and seminal vesicle do not develop. There is no testosterone to be converted into dihydrotestosterone, and the external genitals develop in the typically female way. However, because there is only one X chromosome, such people do not develop ovaries either, and have undifferentiated gonadal tissue. People with this syndrome, called Swyer syndrome, usually take female hormones at puberty, as they do not have ovaries to make them, but otherwise have typical female reproductive anatomy, but they have a Y chromosome. Some people with two X chromosomes have the SRY gene translocated onto one of the X chromosomes. The SRY gene causes the gonads to develop into testicles and not ovaries, and causes further development down the male typical pathway. These people do not produce sperm, however, and are infertile because other genes on the Y chromosome are needed for full development of sperm. So, these people have two X chromosomes, but have testes and male typical reproductive organs. Another difference of sex development is called persistent Müllerian duct syndrome. Here people have XY chromosomes and a functioning SRY, so their gonads develop into testicles, which produce testosterone, leading to the development of the epididymis, the spermatic duct, and the seminal vesicle, and male typical external genitals. But the testes do not produce anti-Müllerian hormone, and the Müllerian ducts develop into fallopian tubes, the uterus, and cervix. People with this difference of sex development have all the male typical reproductive organs which function normally, but they also have some female typical reproductive organs in their abdomen. Some people have XY chromosomes, develop testes and not ovaries, and their testes produce large amounts of testosterone, but their bodies do not respond to this testosterone. They have complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. As their body is not sensitive to testosterone or other androgens, the epididymis, spermatic duct, and seminal vesicle do not form. But as they do make and are sensitive to anti-Müllerian hormone, the fallopian tubes, uterus, and cervix do not form either. As they are not sensitive to testosterone or dihydrotestosterone, the external genitals develop in a female typical way, resulting in a vagina that does not lead to a cervix. The conversion of testosterone into estrogen leads to the development of breasts at puberty, but menstruation obviously cannot occur. These people have bodies that have developed in close to an entirely female typical way, even though they have XY chromosomes and internal testes. Other people have partial androgen insensitivity syndrome. In people with XX chromosomes who develop ovaries, this has little effect on their development, as testosterone levels are so low in people with ovaries. However, in people with XY chromosomes who develop testes and produce large amounts of testosterone, development can be considerably affected. In particular, the external genitalia are ambiguous, having developed somewhere in between the typically male and typically female way. There may be a genital opening resembling a vagina, as well as a structure resembling a large clitoris or a small penis. The testicles may not have descended, and may be found within the skin of the labioscrotal fold. There are many other differences of sex development as well. Some people have a deficiency of the enzyme that converts testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, which is called 5-alpha reductase. If they have ovaries, then this does not affect their development. But if they have testicles, it affects it a lot. The testes produce testosterone and anti-Müllerian hormone, so the fallopian tubes, uterus, and cervix do not develop. The testosterone causes the epididymis, spermatic duct, and seminal vesicle to develop. But the absence or limited amount of dihydrotestosterone leads to ambiguous or female typical external genital development. So here we have people who have testes and develop the internal reproductive organs typical of a male, but whose external reproductive organs can appear quite female. They could also have what looks like an enlarged clitoris or small penis, and these structures can enlarge at the onset of puberty as testosterone levels rise. This is the condition that has attracted much attention and speculation in recent years in middle distance running and boxing. At the 2016 Rio Olympics, all 3 medal winners in the women's category and the 800 meters are thought to have had this condition. 2 boxers who won gold medals at the Paris 2024 Olympics are suspected of the same. Note that people with 5-alpha reductase deficiency, or 5-ARD as it's called, have testicles which produce testosterone to which their bodies respond. Whether or not they are considered to be women, they are gonadal males. Deficiency of another enzyme, 17-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase 3, converts a precursor of testosterone, androstenedione, into testosterone. The deficiency of this enzyme leads to low levels of testosterone and limited dihydrotestosterone production. Affected people with XY chromosomes have testicles, but the external genitalia can be ambiguous or typically female in appearance. The production of huge amounts of androstenedione leads to the production of more testosterone, which leads to more masculine development of the external genitals. This condition again results in people with testicles and XY chromosomes that produce some amount of testosterone which can influence the development of the body, but who have ambiguous or female appearing external genitals. An especially complex difference of sex development is ovotesticular disorder. In this condition, people have both ovarian tissue and testicular tissue. Some people have 1 ovary and 1 testicle. Others have 1 ovary and a gonad that is part ovary and part testicle. Some have 1 testicle and 1 gonad that is part ovary and part testicle. Some have 2 gonads that are part ovary and part testicle. Some have 2 fallopian tubes and a complete uterus. Others have a fallopian tube and a uterus on one side and a spermatic duct on the other. Depending on the amount of testosterone produced by the testicular tissue, the external genitalia may be male typical, female typical, or ambiguous. People with male typical genitals may develop breast tissue at puberty due to the action of the ovarian tissue. If a uterus is present in an individual with a penis, and this person starts a reproductive cycle at puberty, this can manifest as cyclic hematuria. Ovotesticular disorder can produce a wide variety of clinical phenotypes. Ovotesticular disorder is caused by a variety of mechanisms. Sometimes people with two X chromosomes activate genes that lead to testicular development, producing gonads with a combination of ovarian and testicular tissue. Or perhaps the person is a chimera, composed of a fusion of two fertilized eggs, one with XX chromosomes and one with XY chromosomes. If one gonad is produced by one cell line and the other produced by the other cell line, then ovotesticular disorder can result. Alternatively, perhaps the individual is a mosaic composed of cells from a single fertilized egg, but unusual cell division events have produced cell lines with different genetics and different sex chromosomes. Some people with ovotesticular disorder can become pregnant in the normal way, and so are certainly female on the gonadal view. No individual has yet been able to produce both eggs and sperm, though. True hermaphroditism is not reported in humans. Their biology is varied, complex, and fascinating, but the bottom line here is that there are people with ovotesticular disorder who have both ovarian and testicular tissue, who may have two X chromosomes or may have a Y chromosome in some of their cells. It's worth mentioning two further conditions that are relevant here. The first is congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is sometimes considered as a difference of sex development because it can lead to male-appearing external genitalia in gonadal females. There are many important steroids that contribute to human metabolism. Some are androgens, such as testosterone. Others are mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids, which contribute to the body's water balance and to regulating blood sugar levels. All these steroids, however, are made from cholesterol. People with congenital adrenal hyperplasia lack an enzyme that is used to make mineralocorticoid and glucocorticoid from cholesterol, so their metabolism makes androgens instead. As they don't have enough mineralocorticoid or glucocorticoid, their metabolism keeps providing cholesterol to their adrenal glands, and this keeps being diverted into androgen production. This leads to large amounts of testosterone being produced by the adrenal glands. In people with testicles, this does not affect their genital development, but in people with ovaries, it can lead to the development of ambiguous genitalia, or even male-appearing genitalia. The final condition I want to mention is polycystic ovarian syndrome. This isn't a difference in sex development, but it can lead to elevated levels of testosterone in gonadal females. Here, people with ovaries and not testicles can produce greater than normal amounts of testosterone. This can lead to increased body hair, acne, anovulation, and fertility problems. Even though people with congenital adrenal hyperplasia and polycystic ovarian syndrome have higher than usual testosterone for people with no testicular tissue, their levels of serum testosterone still do not reach the low end of the male range. It's very rare for a gonadal female to have testosterone levels above 5 nanomoles per liter, and it's considered pathological for a gonadal male to have testosterone levels below 8 nanomoles per liter, unless they've been taking exogenous steroids. Exogenous steroid use can produce high levels of testosterone in the blood, but it can also produce very low levels because the exogenous steroid switches off steroid production in the testicle, meaning that when the steroid use is stopped, testosterone levels can plummet to very low levels. The average gonadal female testosterone level is 1 nanomole per liter, whereas the average gonadal male testosterone level is 20 nanomoles per liter. There is just about no overlap between testosterone levels in gonadal males and gonadal females. People with differences of sex development do not develop along the typically male or the typically female pathways. This forces us to think carefully about which part of these pathways are relevant for classification in sport. Does the shape of an athlete's external genitalia matter for sport? No. We don't play sport with our genitals, and the shape of our genitals does not itself influence athletic performance. We might use the shape of someone's genitals to help us understand whether their body is responsive to testosterone, but this is not important in and of itself. Does someone's chromosomes or the presence of the SRY gene matter for sport? Again, no. The chromosomes and the SRY gene trigger the developmental pathways, but they are not themselves what immediately causes the differences in athletic development. We might use chromosomes to help us understand how a person has developed, but again, this is not important in and of itself. Is it the presence of testosterone that is important? Again, no. The purpose of championship sport is to find the most exceptional athletes. If we were to use testosterone levels on their own to classify athletes into different kinds, we might mistakenly say that an exceptional athlete is ordinary and that an ordinary athlete is exceptional. Imagine we use a threshold for blood testosterone of 10 nanomoles per liter to classify athletes. Those below the threshold qualify for the women's category, and those above do not. Imagine that there's a gonadal female who has testosterone levels of 11 nanomoles per liter, and that there is a gonadal male who has testosterone levels of 9 nanomoles per liter. This would place the gonadal male in the women's category and the gonadal female in the men's category. If, because of these testosterone levels, the gonadal male ended up being the best athlete in the women's category, would they be an exceptional athlete? No. Their physiology is completely unexceptional given that they have testicles. If the gonadal female would have been an exceptional athlete if allowed to compete in the women's category, but ended up being an ordinary athlete in the male category, would they be an ordinary athlete? No. Their physiology is exceptional, as they are able to produce so much testosterone without testicular tissue, and they should be recognized as an exceptional athlete. As there is almost no overlap between testosterone levels between people with testicles and people without, testosterone might be used as a test for testicular tissue. But testosterone levels themselves are not what is important. It is the effect of testosterone produced by testicular tissue that is relevant to classification in championship sport. People who have or had testicular tissue with the capacity to produce testosterone capable of influencing the development of their body are not eligible for the women's category in sport. The same rule applies to both transgender women and athletes with differences of sex development. From their guidelines on athletes with differences of sex development, it seems that World Athletics also believe that having testicular tissue which produces testosterone that can influence the development of the body is what is important for classification in sport. World Athletics have compiled a list of DSDs that are subject to its regulations. World Athletics state that people with partial androgen insensitivity syndrome, 5-alpha reductase type 2 deficiency, 17-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 3 deficiency, and ovotesticular disorders may not compete in the women's category unless they suppress their testosterone levels. They also say these regulations apply to any other genetic disorder involving disordered gonadal steroidogenesis that results in serum testosterone levels above 2.5 nanomoles per liter, which they take to be the upper limit of the normal range for gonadal females. Also, an athlete must have sufficient androgen sensitivity for that testosterone to have a material androgenizing effect for the regulations to apply. World Athletics explicitly exclude complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and congenital adrenal hyperplasia from the regulations. Complete androgen insensitivity syndrome is excluded because people with this condition are not sensitive to the testosterone their testicles produce. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia is excluded because it does not involve gonadal steroidogenesis. Polycystic ovarian syndrome also does not fall under the regulations. If World Athletics stuck to their own rules, polycystic ovarian syndrome should be included, as it involves testosterone produced by the ovaries, which are gonads after all. World Athletics only appear concerned about conditions involving testosterone produced by testicular tissue. Gonadal females who do not have testicular tissue, but who happen to have serum testosterone levels above 2.5 nanomoles per liter, are allowed to compete in the women's category without testosterone suppression. The World Athletics DSD regulations do not apply to gonadal females who just happen to have high testosterone levels. They apply to people with high testosterone because they have testicular tissue. The World Athletics DSD regulations do not mention Swyer syndrome because people with Swyer syndrome don't have testicles or ovaries and don't fall under the regulation. They may compete in the female category as gonadal females do. Gonadal males with two X chromosomes and gonadal males with a uterus and fallopian tubes due to persistent Müllerian duct syndrome are not mentioned either. I suspect this is because gonadal males tend to identify as male and to compete in the men's category. But if they wanted to compete in the women's category, perhaps because they don't have a Y chromosome or because they have a uterus, they should not be allowed to, because they have testicular tissue that produces testosterone that can influence their body. By picking out those conditions involving testicular tissue that produces testosterone to which the athlete's body responds, World Athletics are on the right track. They should rewrite their guidelines, though, because they don't apply to people with disordered gonadal steroidogenesis, but rather to people with DSDs who have perfectly normal steroidogenesis, given the presence of testicular tissue. However, World Athletics allow people with testicular tissue that produces testosterone that can influence their body to compete in the women's category if they suppress their testosterone, and they should not. This confuses championship and handicap sport. Dividing athletes in this way, according to the kind of body they have, is what is done in championship sport in order to find the best athletes with different kinds of body. And yet, suppressing testosterone to restrict performance is what is done in handicap sport to provide a sporting chance of winning for everyone. World Championships and Olympics are championship contests, and eligibility for a category should not depend on the handicapping of athletes. World Athletics should remember that they organize championship contests and revise their guidelines on athletes with differences of sex development accordingly. In particular, athletes with 5-alpha reductase deficiency should not compete in the women's category in championship sport. Such athletes have testicles, produce levels of testosterone typical for people with testicles, and their bodies are sensitive to this testosterone. They do not have male typical external genitals, but this is not important for athletic classification in championship sport. Other differences of sex development may be more difficult to judge. Someone with partial androgen sensitivity syndrome may only be slightly sensitive to testosterone. Someone with ovotesticular disorder may only have very small amounts of testicular tissue that produces very small amounts of testosterone. Further discussion may be necessary about how to handle these more difficult cases, but many differences of sex development, including 5-alpha reductase deficiency, are not difficult to classify. Also, it is important to note that eligibility for the women's category is not a judgment about who is and who is not a real woman. Some people with ovotesticular disorder are unambiguously women, in the sense that they are gonadal females with fallopian tubes, a uterus, and female typical external genitalia. Some people with this condition can even become pregnant in the normal way. If the distinction between male and female is made to account for human reproduction, these people are unambiguously female. And yet, they may not be eligible for women's sport because they have testicular tissue which produces testosterone to which their body is responsive. Some may consider people with 5-alpha reductase deficiency who have female typical genitals to be female because of the shape of their genitals, or because of how they were raised, or because of what their passport says. Nevertheless, they should not be eligible for women's sport because they have testicles which produce testosterone to which their body can respond. There has been an awful lot of discussion about whether allowing transgender women and athletes with differences of sex development to compete in the women's category is fair. Often people look to the science or to scientists to settle the matter, but the science will never be able to say what is fair. Not enough attention has been paid to the different forms of fairness found in different types of sporting competition. Broadly, there are championship contests and handicap contests. Championship contests are organized to find the best athletes. Categories are used in championship contests to identify different kinds of athlete. A small gonadal female who can lift more than twice her body weight overhead is seen as just as exceptional as a 160 kilo gonadal male who can lift 250 kilos overhead. That is why they both get Olympic gold medals. If athletes in weightlifting were not categorized by sex and weight, her exceptional performance would not be celebrated. Allowing gonadal males or large gonadal females into the category for small gonadal females obstructs the celebration of exceptional athletic performances and should not occur for any reason. Handicap contests use categorization for a completely different reason. They seek to enhance, restrict, or to prevent an athlete's performance to give all competitors a sporting chance of winning. This might mean that the athletic performance of competitors is closely matched, or that the physical characteristics relevant to sport are matched, so that the athlete that makes the most of their physical gifts through training will win. Alternatively, a contest may be fair if a particular physical ability is compensated for. These are all forms of handicap competition. So long as there is close competition between competitors, or so long as the advantage derived from having testicles is eliminated completely, it is possible for gonadal males to compete fairly with gonadal females, safety permitting. Strangely, many commentators, including Neil deGrasse Tyson and Sabine Hossenfelder, and even sport governing bodies, seem to think that Olympic and World Championship sport are handicap contests. Failure to distinguish different forms of fairness found in different forms of handicap contest, and failing to distinguish handicap contests from championship contests has produced a lot of confusion in this discussion. Of course, in handicap contests, gonadal males can compete with gonadal females, so long as they are appropriately handicapped. Even so, this should never happen in championship contests that need a women's category. People deserve to be able to find out how good they are as athletes, so championship contests should be organized. But if people want to have gonadal males and females compete against each other, they can do this too, safety permitting. All you have to do is organize a handicap contest where athletes are matched for performance, like they do with the universal squash rating. You don't have to ruin championship contests to hold handicap contests. You can do both. So, the next time you hear someone say that an athlete with testicles can compete in the women's category if their performance is restricted, please remind them that the women's category is only for people who do not have and who have never had testicles, and that the contest is not a handicap contest, it is a championship contest.